So let's get started with OpenAI and Sam Altman. So we've talked about that company a lot here because, one of the biggest things that, happened during the Super Bowl, Anthropic commercials riffing off them and kind of making fun of them was, Sam Altman and Kate Roush, the CMO at the time, basically, coming out with an essay on Twitter saying like, this is why, we're doing this. This is why we're charging, people, we're bringing ads into OpenAI and basically explaining like the whole thought process, which I thought was too much at the time. Anthropic was basically punching up, and you never want to be the one that's like punching down at like your competitors because you're giving them more attention. Since then, we talked about how they bought TBPN and how we expected this shift in their comms because John Coogan and Jordy Hayes are some of the best communicators out there for tech discourse and just talking about tech optimism and tech in a way that makes people in the tech world feel cool all of a sudden. So we've seen both the shift with OpenAI, which has started talking about how, they're not focused on AI replacing people, but they're focused on the tools that will help humans enable, their new jobs, which is, a huge step, I'd say, at least in the right direction of like, nobody wants to hear that you're going to come take their jobs away and get them fired. But, they're willing to work with a tool that's trying to help make them better. They're not the only ones. You might have noticed that Meta and Mark Zuckerberg are also shifting in that direction. So there must have been some bigger, presentation that was made to all the tech giants to like, hey, maybe we should start talking about AI and, tech being optimistic and innovative and all that. Someone on Twitter identified was that it's better to be cringe than it is to be corporate. And it really seems like he's kind of taking on that persona of like, hey guys, like we just launched a new feature, come check it out. And they're, very short tweets that seem more human as well. Obviously, it's come a long way since he was the guy that was at YC and like was talking to like founders on Twitter. The other news is that they're also changing their data policy. They're now disclosing your data, your information to their marketing partners, formalizing those relationships with outside ad tech. Have you been paying attention to this? What do you think? Do you think it's a step in the right direction? Are you finding it cringe?
I find it like very much early Twitter where like yeah, founders kind of showed up and do a lot of like engagement bait like I'll follow this person or reply to this person who shows up, like trying to get the quick loyalty that way, right? I think he's starting to realize like how effective Twitter is to get people to be loyal to him and to the product. Like a lot of the Twitter interactions that I'm seeing nowadays are, "Hey, I'll switch to this product if you follow me or engage with me." Right? He's making that relationship a little bit more direct, which is very much like in the SF spirit right now. Like you have a lot of AI founders. You had the Cluely, the people behind the Friends necklace who was constantly talking to people with Twitter, and I think he's finally using that playbook in the right way. It is a little bit cringy, it's a little bit young, but it's so far it's seeming to be effective, right? Like, and
Yeah, I find it interesting that you said it's and the examples that you gave were more of like those younger like founders.
Mhm.
And I do wonder if that, jab of him being cringe is the fact that he is like an elder millennial, you know?
Yeah.
Um and it's like does that mean like we've passed that point where it's like you just don't expect millennials or I mean at least the elder ones to be talking to their customer directly, I think that's like, definitely a thing that like the TBPN guys are bringing back, right? Where it's like now that we have our own or should have our own like communication playbooks and like styles of how we're talking to customers, like what are those ways that like we've learned we've talked about here a lot where it's video is so much more important, right? But then also being authentic while you're, writing and speaking. And I think it's interesting that it comes at a time when AI is um a way that a lot of founders are trying to default to because they're either not comfortable writing their own communications, or they want to like over explain, which is what I thought, Altman was doing back when he did the Super Bowl, commercial
Hmm.
explanation or whatever. Um, and like, now it's like, well, just try to, talk directly to your customer base and like bring them on your side, and bring them along in this journey as you're building in public, right? I feel like I'm dropping all these like things that are like the popular things to say, right? You're building in public, your founders, the founder led growth, and all that. And I think like, OpenAI kind of like moved away from that as it grew bigger and bigger. And now they're trying to, revert back to like, hey, we can be a scrappy startup that, is talking directly to like their consumers. And like, here's why you want to like come work with us and not Claude, right? I feel like Claude has that more of that like aura of being for like artists and writers and the creative folks. Whereas ChatGPT kind of has, they're like, a little bit more corporate, a little more boring, probably because, they've been under the Microsoft umbrella for so long, you know?
Right.
Um, but I think this is giving them kind of a chance to change that a little bit. So I'll be curious to see kind of like the direction they go in, because, it is a move that's needed, especially right now when people don't really understand like what AI does or what it can do. But we're also seeing like a lot of backlash towards, data centers being built. And like Dario at Anthropic, is always talking about how like, oh, lawyers, accountants, all these people are going to lose their jobs in the next like 5 years, right? And then we're also seeing a lot of like cultural backlash towards AI, right? We're seeing how there's now, what I call, calling that, this like competency porn, where it's like you want people to come out and show you on video, like prove that they know how to do things, that they can talk about things. Because they want to know that you're actually doing it and it's not AI. So it's a really interesting moment. And I think that OpenAI and like Sam Altman are smart to be moving in this direction. And I think that, TBPN, pushes them in that direction. Because I do think that tech overall needs um, a better story, a better narrative about like where we're headed and like how we are trying to be innovative and like do things to improve people's lives and not just come and, get them all fired.
I was thinking about like around how Anthropic was kind of like dropping the ball in terms of
Mhm,
communication the last week or so, because this is all seems to line up really well, right? The acquisition with TBPN, everything that's going on well with the trial with the app, but it's also there was something that was happening in the AI community where Anthropic was kind of making changes to
mhm.
the coding AI, the plans. It was like they were trying to communicate on on Twitter about like, oh, we have transparency, we're doing some tests, but it was complete opposite of that. And
With the
as
Claude Pro
Sam
thing being taken out and then put back in.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was just like also it feels like the playbook was waiting to be launched, right? Around because that's when I started seeing Sam everywhere, especially more like now that there's context switchers, right? And he came in and it's like, we're gonna like look how bad this communication is, and this is where I'm gonna come in and kind of like make my re debut, right? And
Mhm,
it's also like there's starting to be a little bit more of a praise for founders who are kind of acting more executive and transparent than they used to be.
mhm,
Not sure if you follow, but for example, Xbox has kind of
mhm,
been
yeah.
reclaiming their identity with the new CEO, and that CEO has been doing an incredible job using Twitter to communicate everything that's going on. Even like when
Mhm,
the earnings didn't beat, like something that most CEOs would never really kind of offhand comment about. She's like, this was to be expected and we're going to move on from here. And not even just like that statement that was like very human, very on point on Twitter, on
mhm,
X, right? It showed how much of a difference and praise there is for CEOs to kind of act a little bit themselves. So all of this has kind of been lighting the fire, I think, under Sam with this
mhm.
move.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree.